Provided by the Annenberg Foundation and the Friends of Firing Line.
David Budnoy is, among other things, a homosexual who contracted AIDS and very nearly died. When he recovered, he resolved to tell his very wide public, centered in Boston, about his private life. He has written a book telling about that life and his experiences. It's called Life is Not a Rehearsal, a memoir, and is published by Doubleday. Mr. Budnoy is from the Middle West. He attended Yale, did graduate work at Harvard on the Near East, taught at Northwestern, got his Ph.D. from Brandeis. During this period, he was establishing his reputation as a radio host and interrogator who, many years before Rush Limbaugh, was a candid conservative. Notwithstanding this, he won over his huge audience and continues broadcasting 5 hours every day out of station WBZ. Simultaneously, he was writing voluminously for conservative journals, including National Review and the American Spectator. The book he has now published raises questions that warrant public discussion. What are the specific problems of such homosexuals as he, whose experiences since college age he describes with great candor in the book? To what extent are social pressures responsible for the extravagance of such behavior as his? How does his book instruct us in behavior and attitudes at once generous and defensible? To participate in the discussion, we have Miss Arianna Huffington, well known to our audience as she is a prominent author and herself a television and radio hostess, the mother of 3 children, author of books on Picasso and Maria Callas, and most recently author of The Fourth Instinct on the Emptiness of a Purely Secular World. David, I will so refer to you, given our very long friendship. The late Matthew Scully, reviewing your book to the American Spectator, quotes from your prodigious homosexual activities and comments, quote, "Sometimes he gives the impression that absent AIDS, all would have been well." Did you mean to suggest that?
Not quite. I think that, as you point out in the book, I try not to sugarcoat anything, and certainly during the youthful exuberance of my roaming about, as you said in your own review in National Review, it seemed countless episodes. I think you probably give me more credit for activity than I can claim credit for, but I certainly did not feel there was anything wrong with it, any more than I imagine a relatively active heterosexual bachelor feels. I think that age, not age, but age itself, and a certain maturity and a certain sense of proportion alter the way people act, as it has in my case, and I find far less a sense of desire, consequently less desire to effect that diminished desire. But I don't feel that I would have continued on the path of my 30s, in my 50s, had there not been AIDS, any more than I would continue my athletic events.
No, you're just talking about, you're talking about the waning of the libido, and I'm not.
Yes,
I'm talking about what you portray in your book as the activity of a normal homosexual. Yeah. I wrote the heterosexual Lothario is hardly alone, let alone unique. Right. But as I said, he's correctly regarded as unusual and destructive. You invite no such conclusion about the gay world.
Yeah. And I don't think it's destructive, and I don't think that it's evil, and I don't think that it is automatically to be either praised, as we say, boy, what a stud is he, or what, you know, what a ba-ba-boom, or condemned. It seems to me it's an is. I think there are many faults in my book, but one of them is I think I do not properly evaluate the meaning of some of it. I think the strengths are evaluating the meaning of my denial, etc. But in that area, and you pointed out also that there does not seem to be sort of a contextualizing of this behavior. I acted in my sex life as I act in my political life, what I want to do and want to say, I did and said, and do and say. And I think it sort of dovetails in this way, that an active sexual individual who feels no guilt about it, like an active political polemicist who feels no shame being a conservative in a liberal environment, is going to do as he will. And I feel that in that sense, I'm sure you praised
Block
Bill.
that analogy.
You don't like that one. I was referring to me, not you, William. But, did I catch him? I don't know.
Ms. Huffington, how do you react on this question in general?
Well, what is interesting from the book, which I loved incidentally, is that when AIDS struck and when you stopped denying that it had struck and that it was not a bizarre case of flu, as you put it, then you suddenly found a perspective in your life that was missing before. And that's probably what you mean by contextualizing.
Yeah.
That earlier, yes, you may have done what you felt like doing, and that perspective, therefore, was missing. But in what context? What else was going on in your life? And that's what I find often when people just emphasize the fact that they're gay without what else is going on in their lives. I mean, yes, you're gay, but there are a lot of other roles that you have. You know, you have a job, you have parents, you have friends. And you said that yourself after you went public. You found that a lot of gay magazines and a lot of gay commentators started saying, why didn't you come out earlier? And
Yes.
why did you say that it was okay at Yale to lead this double life? So there's a lot of political correctness going on in that world.
Not only okay, but absolutely necessary. I mean, can you imagine, Bill was at Yale a little bit earlier than I, but you know fully well that somebody who'd affected his first romance as a senior with a junior in the year 1961 would hardly have been able to announce this to his friends and family. I mean, I don't regard that as bad. I rather got a kick out of it, but you're quite right. While conservatives rallied around by their humanity and their decency and the fact that I am one of them in politics and temperament, many radical gays thought me repugnant because I didn't announce I was HIV positive in 1988 as if it's anybody's business. The only really severe criticism I've gotten have been from people who said, well, how dare you not be one of us, which is the terrible stereotype that gay means left-wing any more than somehow straight automatically means conservative. You'd love it if it were the case, Bill, but as you know, a lot of heterosexuals are anything but conservative. So they just don't like me, you see, because I don't have their politics.
No, I am making a different point. If you had been a heterosexual and you had recited the frequency of your contacts, you would have been in the tradition of the Lothario. Now, you don't remark in your book that distinction between your practices and the practices of people whose appetites are more conventional.
Yeah.
Now, in your failure to do so, I'm asking myself the question, is it because frequency of contact of the kind that you engaged in is simply normal among homosexuals?
I don't know where I fall on the spectrum, but I would say that men are by nature more willing and eager for promiscuous behavior than are women. Consequently, since male homosexuals seem to have more relationships with one another than men and women with each other, and they more than with women together, there may be a hierarchy in terms of activism. Two promiscuous men will tend to have more involvements with one another and with others than will a largely monogamously oriented female and a largely, at least, roaming-eyed heterosexual. I think as people like George Gilder and others have pointed out quite correctly, women tame men. I have no argument with the notion that marriage is a taming institution and salutary by and large for society and for men indeed. I wonder, had I had a devoted lover and had I been monogamously oriented in my 30s and 40s and 50s as I was in my early 20s, whether I would have done these things. I hope not. I can't guarantee it, but I hope not.
Well, look, we know the word nymphomania, the woman who has more than normal sexual appetites.
Right.
Satyriasis is the male equivalent of that.
Yeah.
Now, what I'm asking is, the satyriasis about which you write is not, I judge, an aspect of the availability of complementary people who have satyriasis. It is an appetite which most heterosexuals tend within limits to prevail against.
Or they don't find the opportunity for it. I mean, one wonders. Let us say that the average woman, the average heterosexual, normal woman, were as interested in promiscuous activities with as many men as possible as the average sort of guy in the dating bar is. Would the average straight guy in the dating bar have as much sex as the average gay guy in the dating bars in the very physically oriented 20s? I don't know the answer, but my guess is yes. I really think that availability is a concomitant of the appetite. The appetite is there, but the availability for young gay men is so, should we say, so overwhelmingly encompassing. The desire is there, and there's the receiver of the desire, ready and willing to go on with it. I talk with young gay people who are constantly involved, and I look with them and I say, I remember those days. It's not mine now and hasn't been for some decades, but I remember those days, and I wonder, my heterosexual roommate, whom I mentioned in my book, who was more active than the rest of us, where I think probably was, had he gone on for years being unmarried, would have been a very successful, if not Lothario, then at least certainly a man about town sexually. And I think this is probably true of a lot of young men today. I don't know for sure because I'm 56, not 26. So I don't know.
Well, let me ask you something to comment on that, because then I want to get back to another aspect of it.
Well, I find that if you look at the Lotharios in literature, like Don Juan or Mozart's opera, you don't just look at what they do physically. You look at the whole context of emotions, betrayal, pain. So normally, when we deal with human beings that are involved in multiple relationships, promiscuous relationships with the other sex, there is seduction involved. And there isn't a lot of seduction in your story. It seems as though you want somebody, you get him, you move on to the next target. Yeah. You know, you don't have to sort of cajole them or send them flowers or all the equivalent emotional acts. And therefore, because there isn't seduction involved in a lot of the cases you described, there isn't betrayal involved.
No, there isn't. You know, I think sometimes that the image of the gay person, which you know enough gay people, as do you, to know that it applies to some but not to all, leads to stereotypes that those of us who move beyond those particular behaviors can look ruefully at, but not challenge. I mean, it is true, yes, the average gay fellow in his 20s is going to be more sexually active than otherwise were he straight, because gradually he would get into an engagement and a marriage and so on. But, you know, you think of things that make you laugh. I remember when the exposure of the harassment and the rapes within the military came up a few months ago, I said on the radio, I said, that's what you get when you let straights into the army. You know, in other words, there's a certain amount of craziness about, I mean, my listeners, I think, knew I was kidding about it, but, I mean, the notion that all of us must be assumed to be seducers, nonsense, you know it, and Ariana knows it, and that all of us must be betrayers. I think among my many faults, one of them has never been, thank God, trying to hurt anybody by seducing them. And I think many fine men and women are homosexual and wouldn't dream of doing anything bad to anybody else.
But I see here a contradiction, because in one paragraph in your book you say, look, one of the reasons we people have this problem is because social pressures are so censorious that they don't sanction monogamous unions. Now, if the social pressures were that active, it seems to me that they would diminish the frequency of homosexual contacts. Now, I've seen figures, and I haven't seen you deny them, that simply says, whatever it is that activates the homosexual asks for more frequent release than is biologically expected of the heterosexual. Now, if so, this covers your entire life. The kind of thing that Huntington was talking about, the pain and instant and evanescent pleasures of contact with a stranger in a park. Now, that kind of thing is sociologically interesting and doesn't necessarily lead to censorious judgments, but certainly invites them, because that's not the kind of behavior that is thought of as something that society ought to encourage.
Do we do the same then for the Lothario heterosexual and say that there's something genetic,
But they are aberrant.
It's your word, aberrant, isn't it? Not necessarily mine. In other words,
Don Juan Lothario are in our literature, and Frank, what's his name, because they did the kind of thing they did. But the kind of thing they did, you are telling us, is quite normal for the homosexual.
I think it is for many, absolutely, especially if you're not unappealing or if you're not living in an environment where it is impossible to affect it. I lived in New York and Boston and Cambridge and after a brief time in New Haven, never anywhere else, or Houston for a brief period. It is possible to do it. You know, you almost stepped into the genetic interpretation a moment there, which I'm not even sure I'm into, in which you said that there may be something in the homosexual that draws him to more of this behavior than is otherwise seemly. And this would suggest, unless the one sits there at a certain age and says, I think it will adopt a new should we say, impulse from my inner being, you have to assume one is born with it. I don't know that people are born gay or straight. I think certainly it doesn't become a matter of choice. Nobody sits there at age 17 and says, I think I'll become a heterosexual or a homosexual. But I don't think that we're different. I mean, you've known me for nearly 30 years and know that most of us, and even many others, function quite well, do our jobs, do things, and perhaps at night, when the married heterosexual goes home to the wife or the husband and the children, the unmarried homosexual may feel, I think I'll go on the prowl, to use a term that you put in quite properly in your review. One prowls and finds, and one gets. And I think that this is not unlike what young heterosexuals do in the dating bars. Bill, I don't know that there isn't an identity there except in availability of it. And when I said that the social pressures...
You mean fewer people score?
Yes, I think they do because there are fewer women available after women finally find the contentment of a marriage, then they stop in general. Not that every woman is monogamous, but most women, it seems to me, try very hard to establish a family. It's a beautiful thing. All three of us were raised by real families, and we cherish our parents for what they're able to do. I will not be a parent or a husband, but I certainly do not think that the heterosexual urge to nesting is in any way a bad thing. I think it's a wonderful thing. I wish I had it.
But also, I mean, I have a lot of homosexual friends who have that urge to nest. Yeah. It's not just the heterosexuals who have that urge, who have the urge to bring up children, which is why you have homosexual couples adopting children. So I'm a little surprised that you are treating it in isolation from the other urges. Is it just a sign of aging and maturing, or is it just that different individuals have more need for multiple relationships?
Of course. And also, look, I don't want to pretend anything. If the book doesn't pretend, I don't pretend here. I don't pretend I'm looking for a relation. I don't pretend I want to marry anybody. I'm telling you simply that I think for many people it would be tremendously advantageous, both for them and the society around them, if the desire of homosexual men and women to be able to be completely accepted for what they are wouldn't help them to perhaps settle down and feel less like outlaws. Part of homosexual adventurism is a sense of being an outlaw. First, when it was illegal, when I first began doing homosexual things in my late teens, I wasn't arrested, but I could have been and could have been jailed for it. And in some places, jailed for decades for it. Now we don't jail people for it in the Western world, but we certainly do regard them as you put it, aberrant, or at least as somehow violating what ought to be. It's possible.
What's the attitude in Europe on the point we're talking about? In, say, England or Greece, is it expected that certain social pressures against, so to speak, exhibitionistic homosexuality are expected and helpful, or is that just simply disappearing?
Well, two very different cultures. In Greece, you know, we invented it, but it's not as prevalent.
You just wrote about it earlier. I'm not sure you invented it.
Well, we certainly invented the word. I mean, the word has the Greek origin.
That was more pedophilia, though, wasn't it?
No, homosexuality is a Greek word. And
I think it was a Greek word. I mean,
it becomes homo.
I mean, the tradition was more the young man.
And the mentor. It was more, again, but what is interesting about the ancient Greek tradition is that it was not just physical, which is what Bill has been talking about. It was very much a mentoring relationship. It was that the young man who was learning from the old wise man. And in the process of all that learning, there was also sexual activity, which is very different than going on a prowl. In England, of course, we have the whole tradition of public schools, where homosexuality is rampant, and then often the double life. Even today, you have married people who are still maintain their gay relationship, which I'm sure goes on here too, but it's much more prevalent in England, and more damaging when it becomes public, especially if somebody has a public life.
On the grounds that it is more sharply disapproved of in England than here?
I think it still is. I think
we have, what, three or four acknowledged homosexuals in Congress. Would there be no such thing in England as a acknowledged MP homosexual?
There might be. I'm not aware of an. Are you aware of an acknowledged MP in England?
You have enough peers who are in the House of Lords, at least. No, I don't know. I think the acknowledgement is another part of it. As you know, the Republican fellow from Wisconsin that even Newt Gingrich urged to rescind his determination to retire, and people wanted him to run again. They liked him so much, homosexual or not. This is, I think, what we can expect in future, that gradually that people will begin to look at what you are and do outside of sex, and will say, do I like that? I mean, Bill, I've written for your magazine for more than half my adult life, and I don't think you ever felt, my goodness gracious, I wonder what he's doing at night, therefore he can't be a writer for us. I mean, this is the reality that civilized people...
It's silly.
No, but it isn't silly.
Nobody I know says a homosexual can't be a good writer or a good bicyclist or a good anything.
Many people do if they call talk programs. Trust me, Bill. I guarantee you many of the people that I experienced, not so much nowadays, but earlier on, really couldn't imagine that homosexual as one facet of a life and productive doctor or lawyer or whatever the case might be could be reconciled. I know it is reconcilable. You and Ariana know it is reconciled. But we're still dealing with a certain lag in comprehending this. And
when was there not a prominent homosexual writer? I mean, dating back to Hellenic times, anybody who says because he's a homosexual, he's incapacitated from practicing law medicine is preposterous.
Right.
But it has been considered preposterous by Ariadne forever.
By you, yes, and by Ariadne, yes. But
no, but however, I don't think that renders preposterous the notion that homosexuals have certain problems, quote unquote problems, which are richly described in your own book. You say that all society combines to prevent you from having a continuous union. But in your book you describe 3 unions which could have continued, but didn't because you elected to go on.
They were covert, however, to the extent that they were not known outside the world. I mean, this is not one of these experiences, any of the 3 of them, in which we announce to our colleagues. Obviously, there's always a demi-monde, and there's always a sort of clique rather, of people of all sorts who know what's going on within it. And I'm not, by the way, an advocate for gay marriage. I leave that to my friend Andrew Sullivan. But I do think that if one were not seeing this hysterical reaction against it from people who simultaneously say those terrible promiscuous homosexuals, but how dare they wish to be married and take our precious word and use it for themselves, it is a catch-22. It's a little bit of a whipsaw thing here. Some people, it seems to me, will always be promiscuous. Perhaps if I were still in my 20s, I might still be AIDS or no AIDS. I don't think so, but I don't know. But other people would like very much, as Ariana's friends, to cohere, to make a family of sorts. And I think that the civilized approach to it, which both of you manifest, is by no means the predominant mode. There's so many people who simply do not comprehend what I'm trying to say.
There are many homosexual couples that are perfectly content to be living together, to have a permanent relationship without feeling the need to go through the ritual of marriage.
Oh, of course, and that's why I say it's not a big deal to me.
Camille Paglia being one of them, and she has written very eloquently on the subject.
Is she a lesbian now, this week?
No. She has been a lesbian for quite a long time, with a permanent relationship with a wonderful woman, actually. And they live together. As far as they're concerned, it's a permanent relationship, but they don't feel the need to have the sort of validation of society by going through the ritual of marriage.
And I think that that's fine for a great many people. As I said, it is not happens to be one of my crusades. Bill, you're quoting from the part where I'm referring to the end of the meaningful relationships, as it were, with Andrew in 1966. All right, we're now 30 years away from that. And then is when I'm describing the pressures that make it so difficult. Today, I could certainly be what I am on radio and television and so on in Boston if I had, what is a ghastly term, a significant other, and hated, or partner, whatever. No one would care one way or the other. I'm talking now in a historical retrospect, really, about my life at that point, and looking back. And then you sent your wonderful review, National Review, that there was an ineffable sadness to the paragraph that you quote in there, which I say, I really sort of wish this were. Again, I try to deny nothing. I sort of wish I was slightly a different person, more given to monogamy. Maybe I pour myself into my work and my teaching and make my family out of my students and so on. And it's a substitute of sorts. It isn't the same thing. And who knows, maybe somebody will see this program, Bill. You may be Dolly Levi. Somebody may say, I want to meet that Broadway person. I'd like to be his significant other. We'll invite you to the wedding. Bill.
Thank you, David Budnoy. Thank you, Arianna Huffington, ladies and gentlemen.
Next week on Firing Line, host William F. Buckley Jr. talks with former HEW Secretary Joseph A. Califano Jr. about marijuana for medical use. This program was a Warren Steibel production in association with South Carolina ETV. Funding for Firing Line was made possible by a major grant from the John M. South Carolina